Hi everyone. Thank you for joining this lecture given by Dr. Georgia Dimari, but very, very interesting topic. Georgia, thank you very much for participating in this lecture series and giving this very interesting lecture. Let me introduce Georgia Dimari. Dr. Georgia Dimari is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Political Science of the University of Crete. She explores the transformation of the Greek migration policy the post-2015 period. She holds a PhD degree from the same department with her thesis focusing on the desecuritization of migration in Greece. She also holds a Master of Arts in American Studies from the University of Turin and a Bachelor in International and European Studies from the University of Piraeus. Her fields of interest revolve around security, securitization of migration, desecuritization and migration policy, whereas she currently started studying the securitization of COVID-19 in Greece. She recently participated as researcher under scholarship in the research program entitled Impact and Categorization of the Prospects of Integration of Refugees into the Greek Productive System, case study in Crete and Mytilene, which was co-funded by the European Social Fund and national funds as part of the project supporting researchers with emphasis on young researchers. She currently participates as a researcher of the Department of Political Science and the Department of Mathematics of the University of Crete in the research program entitled Management of Migration in Greece, construction of a pilot model, which is a startup, for forecasting migration flows and development of policy scenarios for Greek immigration policy, which is funded by the Research and Management Committee of the University of Crete. So, Georgia, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor to be able to be in position to present my research, actually our research. I will introduce our team as well in the context of the political culture series of the ECPR. I cannot see my presentation.
Can
you see it now?
Full screen? We can see it, but you're not full screen.
Okay, just a moment. Now?
Just a second, it's loading.
No?
It's not full screen on my view, but it's perfect from my side.
It's okay. Even if it's not full screen, it's okay also.
Okay, so once again, thank you very much for having me here. I'm going to talk to you about the first results of a project that is funded by the Research Committee of the University of Crete. And I'm actually a part of a team whose the scientific coordinator is Professor Papadakis, and the principal investigator is Professor Michael Tarboudakis, and then it's me and another postdoctoral researcher from the University of Crete, and more in particular from the Department of Mathematics. And we have another PhD candidate participating in this program, Nikos Kosmadakis. So this is an ongoing project that I'm going to talk to you about. So let me introduce the paper. Our presentation revolves around the very initial findings of a funded project. As I told you, its acronym is PreMiGro, that regards the creation of a startup pilot prediction model of short and long-term migration flows in Greece through the use of machine learning tools. So,
excuse me, Georgia, have you changed now here the slide?
I have changed it. Can you see
we
that?
We can see the second slide. So maybe now we can see the introducing the paper.
Great. Okay. So in the first phase of the project that centered on the assessment of data regarding historical number of migrants to Greece that are associated with country of origin and its political status for the period 1919-2022, it became evident that the well-established already discontinuity of the Greek migration policy seems to be correlated, among others, to the lack of a coherent data policy on migration. And this is so for the whole framework of the Greek migration policy ever since its inception during the 1990s, up to these days, as we will see in a bit. A first glance at these project outcomes highlights some of the reasons concerning the peculiarity of the Greek migration policy. More in particular, the securitization of migration in Greece, the negative perception of migrants and refugees from Greek citizens, and the absence of a coherent Greek migration policy per se could indeed, we argue, be studied through the lens of the absence of a rationalized migration data policy in Greece, among other things. So as we know, migration is a dominant topic in the political scene Europe-wide, and this situation has posed and poses the challenge to provide reliable prediction of future trends of migration flows to politicians so as to comprehend migration dynamics and orient their decisions and related legislation towards optimum solutions to manage flows and the population of migrants, leading to a political culture of consensus. So Greece, as we know, is at the center of this necessity due to mainly two factors. First, we have its geopolitical location as a first step country for migrants. And second, its proven, unfortunately, inability to handle massive migration flows as a result of its fragmented migration policy. So our paper concerns, as I already told you, the presentation of the first results of our project. And the model, which is of an experimental character, is currently being constructed on the basis of a multi-parametric data set concerning historical number of migrants to Greece associated with country of origin and its political status. The framework now of the model regards a properly trained scheme based on state-of-the-art machine learning models. The end result of our project is expected to be an evidence-based policy tool that will lead to policy scenarios that in turn will tackle societal challenges that affect, we argue, the politicalness of everyday lives. So, as I already told you, the main aspect here is the discontinuity of the migration policy in Greece in terms of migrant and refugee arrivals for the period under investigation. And next, its relation with the political culture as regards the Greek migration policy making, as well as the perception of the migration issue from the Greek people. The analysis conducted is related to the processing of the previously mentioned multi-parametric data set that regards historical number of migrants and refugee arrivals to Greece for the period under investigation associated with country of origin and political status. And more particularly, the paper zooms, the presentation actually, which is going to be a paper, at the sources that provide this data. This is a very crucial aspect actually regarding the migration data policy in Greece. So we are going to focus here. So I'm going to talk to you about some things that we already know, but I think that maybe a refresh could be a good start to proceed with the paper. During 2015, over 1 million people arrived in Europe by sea, and in particular on Greece, which eventually became a place of reception of huge migratory refugee flows. I'm sorry. This situation posed a major challenge to Greek political authorities, and we have a new migration policy emerging and taking shape in Greece, which began to systematically transform the core of Greece's migration policy landscape to mostly fragmented attempts to manage migration in the context of the 5 nodes of the transformation of the Greek migration policy. We have made this categorization of the Greek migration policy with Professor Papadakis in another article we have published together. And we argue that these are the European migration agenda that was signed in May 2015, the EU-Turkey joint statement of the 18th of March 2016, the instrumentalization of the refugee issue by Turkey in February 2020, the arrival of the coronavirus pandemic, and the new pact on migration and asylum signed in September 2020. So, when faced with the refugee crisis of 2015, Greece proved totally unprepared to handle and manage this situation. And this is so not only because the country did not have the means to accommodate such a big number of people that were crossing its sea in terms of hosting policy, the state had also to deal with the perception of the crisis it dealt with by Greek people. This was a very crucial aspect, actually, the way it was presented by the media and transferred to the general public opinion. So this double trouble surely surfaced the inability of the Greek policy to effectively implement of the Greek politicians, to effectively implement migration policy. And the reason for this is that Greece at that point lacked a coherent migration policy framework. This is the case today again, and this was the case in the past, as we already know. What we can see is that the Greek migration policy is widely fragmented, leading, among many other things, to ineffectiveness when action should be taken. Many reasons account for this, such as the lack of a national long-term strategy on migration, the securitization of migration in Greece, which is an ongoing and endless phenomenon, the inability to walk along the lines of the European migration policy, and the incapacity of EU policymakers to practically induce mandatory solidarity in the burden sharing among members that are not at the so-called front line of migration management. Another very important reason which we think and we prove actually that it's neglected is the lack of a rationalized data policy on the issue of migration ever since its inception when Greece became an importing country of migrants. This argument is supported by evidence presented here now. I'm going to talk about this now, and that pertain to the whole time frame of Greece being a host country of migrants from the 19th, when the Soviet Union dissolved and many people from the South and Eastern Europe sought safe havens in Greece or migrated for a better standard of life up to this point. So, as it will be shown, ever since that time frame, the 1990s, there is not a coherent, reliable, and rationalized migration data policy in Greece. So I'm now going to cut into chase and show you a table regarding the discontinuity, actually, of the migration policy in Greece for the period under investigation. So we have here a very important table. I don't know whether you can see it properly. We have categorized our research in year, number of migrants, sources regarding arrivals that were granted asylum, and then we have the very important emergence and setup of the operational data portal refugee situations. As you can see, we begin our research from 1992, and we actually have concluded up to this point that we are talking now, but we provide data for 2022 because they are more concrete. As we can see in the first column, we have a certain number of migrants in Greece in 1992, 271. Okay, a number of them undocumented. So what is important here is that we have a secondary source that provides us with this number. We cannot find any reliable source for the 90s that could provide us numbers of actual migrants and refugees in Greece, despite the fact that there were massive flows of migrants in Greece that period. The first serious attempt comes in 2001 with the census that was conducted in 2001 by the Greek Statistical Authority, which nevertheless provides numbers for legal migrants. The next serious attempt is again after 10 years in 2011, where we have 912,000 documented migrants, again by the Greek Statistical Authority, but we don't have the number of undocumented migrants. So for the year 2012, which is very important, we don't have, again, a primary source to provide us with reliable numbers of migrant arrivals in Greece. We have actually a secondary source, which is Triantafylivdou, which is a very important migration research figure in Greece. Actually, she's a researcher that has contributed a lot in our understanding of migration policymaking in Greece. It's a secondary source, though. So we have the number of migrants for that year in Greece. You can see the decrease here. And then we have a very major turn in Greek migration policy in terms of data In 2013, we have the Ministry of Migration and Asylum beginning to gather data. From now on, we have actually daily arrivals. This is very important. 13 up to 2022, daily numbers of migrants, but we have only numbers that were granted asylum. That are the numbers that the Ministry of Migration and Asylum gives in its website. We don't have numbers of undocumented migrants. We don't have a concrete, a reliable source that could show us returns. I could not find the number of people that were returned from Greece to their country anywhere. And then we have a very, very important evolution in this area. We have the setup of, as I previously stated, of the Operation Data Portal. ODP is going to be referred to from now on. We have sea and land arrivals. This is actually a portal that was set up from the United Nations Refugee Institution to give concrete, accurate numbers on migrant and refugee arrivals in the whole world, actually, and with an emphasis in the Mediterranean. So we have country situations, and these data that I have here are from Greece. And so from 2014, we can see yearly arrivals here, but again, they don't match with the Ministry of Migration and Asylum's numbers. This is a very serious problem. We can see from the ODP when we research it that these numbers come from the Ministry of Migration and Asylum, actually, from the Greek government. And it's very peculiar that we cannot match them. What is distinct here, though, is that these numbers concern every single human person that set foot on Greek territory, either it was granted asylum or not. So if we assume that we can deduct the number of migrants from the Ministry of Migration and Asylum from the number of ODP, it should give us a proper picture on the migration landscape in terms of arrivals. But this is not the case. It's very hard to have accurate numbers, actually, and this is a very big problem for our research. I'm now going to proceed to the next slide, which concerns a graph depicting migrants' main nationalities for the period under investigation and their related cause. So for the first period, which is the 1991 to 2001, we have mostly Albanians due to the collapse of the Soviet Union. For the next period, which is here, this is our categorization, and of course, this is a fragmentation, a little fragment of our categorization. From 2000, again, mostly Albanians and from the South and Eastern Europe in general, due to proximity and network building and, of course, economic hardship at these areas. And then from 2012 to 2014, we have Afghanistan, we have many Afghani people, mainly Afghani people, actually, because we have an uprising and intentions between the US and Afghanistan. For the next period, which is the so-called, the famous refugee crisis, we have Syrian, Afghan Republic people from Afghanistan and Iraq. And what is peculiar now is that we have a serious decrease for the period 2020 to 2021. We have, again, people from Afghanistan, Syria, Turkey, Somalia. And of course, we have this decrease I told you before due to the pandemic. And then we have an uprising again in 2022. We have people from Syria, Palestine, and Somalia. And we have the very serious incident, the instrumentalization of refugee crisis from Turkey. So one quick glance at the above numbers, along with the problematic that the lack of a data policy on migration brings forward, could clearly explain the fragmentation of the Greek migration policy, which is sustained by an ad hoc ingredient that renders it, at the end of the day, ineffective. Indeed, all estimates of formal as well as of informal migration arrivals are based on problematic databases that do not agree between them. those that appear from time to time in the national and international literature seem to be unreliable. And this is to be clear, we do not hold the view that the researchers are not reliable. This should be clearly mentioned. Every researcher has this embedment in his or her research. We cannot find reliable numbers. This is a fact. This not makes us unreliable. We just, present the data that we find. So proceeding to the conclusion of this presentation, we assert actually that the ineffectiveness of the Greek migration policy can be linked with a triple impact in the Greek case as regards migration. First, we have the political culture of Greece in relation to migration, which is characterized by the securitization of migration. So we think that the lack of a data migration policy is totally linked with the situation because we don't have a basis of knowledge. We don't. So it's very easy to manipulate the migration issue towards the benefit of security from people that want to render migration securitized. Second, we have the reception of migrants from Greeks, which is negative. And there have been many cases of xenophobia, mainly towards Islam, of course. And last but not least, we have the Greek migration policy per se, which, as I previously stated, is not coherent. It is highly affected by the persistent and evident incapacity of the EU to make a consistent and fair common migration policy in line with the rest of the EU member states, and especially the ones that are at the forefront of the reception of laws. So the absence of a unified data and subsequently the lack of a consistent data policy have inevitably, we argue, affected the Greek migration policy landscape, even impacting at some extent on the precarity of people seeking refuge in Greece. This is a very big issue to analyze that, nevertheless, I'm not going to talk about here. What is important is that our project aspires to tackle these issues through the concentration and unification of all existing data on migration and through the articulation of future predictions based on the numerical and general data obtained, so as to contribute innovatively in the rationalization of the migration data policy in Greece and in turn in the rationalization of the Greek migration policy overall. This is actually our presentation. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk about these important issues, and I'm here for your questions.
Dearest Georgia, thank you very much for this really, really interesting presentation. Thank you again.